7 applications. I'd fanned them across my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, under the lamp I read case files by, and I'd found the one thing I wasn't supposed to find. 14 years, this has been my job. To look at paper like this and see the lie folded inside it, a date that won't line up, an address that turns out to be a mail drop over a check cashing place, a signature that leans a single degree too far the wrong way. I'm good at it. Good enough that the bureau routes me the files nobody else can crack. The ones where the money is already gone and the name left holding it belongs to somebody who trusted the wrong person. So when $84,000 in dead defaulted loans surfaced wearing my name, all of it bled out into my brother's bar, 3 exits up the interstate. I did the only thing I know how to do. I pulled the originals, not the summaries, the originals, with every signature line still on them. I laid all 7 out under the lamp. I looked. Every application had 2 signatures, mine on top, 7 times, in a hand that wasn't mine, and underneath it, 7 times, a second name, smaller, careful. Each letter set down on its own. The way a person writes when writing is still a thing they have to think about. I didn't move for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. In the drawer behind me, there was a little blue passbook I've kept since I was 9 years old, and for no reason I could have named, I turned and looked at that drawer like it had said something out loud. I didn't call my mother. I already knew what my mother would say. She'd said it 4 days earlier at her Sunday table, folding my bank statements into a neat little square under her water glass. 36 and alone, she'd said. What does a woman like you need credit for when your brother has children to raise? So I called the bank instead, and the woman in the fraud unit, a woman who does for a living the exact thing I do, who has read 10,000 of these and trained her voice flat as a table so it never cracks, went quiet when she brought up that second name. Quiet the way you go when the paper stops being paper. Ingrid, she said, you need to come in and see this in person, and you're going to want to come alone. I didn't drive over that night. I sat with the 7 pages until the lamp went hot and the coffee turned from cold into something worse. My hands stayed steady. I noticed it the way you notice a stranger's hands, from across a room, with a little distance and a little surprise. 14 years of holding other people's voices level on the phone, and here was mine, flat as a countertop, while everything underneath it quietly came apart. At some point, I slid the 7 pages into a folder, and the folder into my work bag. Then I opened the kitchen drawer and took out the blue passbook and held it and put it back, because I wasn't ready to understand why my hand had gone looking for it. To tell you what a child's passbook has to do with $84,000, I have to walk you back past all of it. Back to a version of me who still trusted a bank because my mother's hand was warm on my shoulder while I signed. But first, you have to know what I do for a living, because it is the reason I was the wrong daughter to steal from, and the reason it still took me 36 years to notice I'd always been the easiest. The Monday before any of this, I froze a man's whole financial life to save it. I was 68. Somebody in another state had opened 9 accounts in his name across 2 years, moving from store cards to auto loans as the credit built, the way you'd fatten a calf. He didn't cry when I called. The old ones almost never do. He just kept saying he didn't understand. He'd worked 40 years, he paid on time, he didn't understand. And my whole job in that moment was to make my voice into a floor he could stand on. I walked him through the freeze. I logged the blocks. I opened the identity theft affidavit and read him the number he'd carry now like a second birthday. Then I hung up, and I sat in the little gray light of my monitor, and I thought what I think 100 times a year in that job. Thank God it wasn't someone he loved. Because that is the part nobody tells you about this work. Strangers are easy. Strangers you can freeze. The files that end people are the ones where the second name belongs to family, because family had your social security number in a drawer and your birthday memorized and 30 years of your trust sitting there to spend. I filed 9 of those a year. I was the person the bureau trusted to see it coming from a mile off. I never once thought to pull my own. Here is the memory I kept for 27 years, folded up small and warm, where I could reach it whenever I needed proof of something. I am 9. It is the 3rd Street branch, the old one with the marble sill and the brass pen chained to the counter. My mother has driven me there special, just the 2 of us, and she has told me all week that today I become responsible. There's a stool behind the counter, and the teller lets me stand on it so I can reach. And my mother's hand is on my shoulder, steady and proud, while a woman slides a small blue book across to me. My name is printed inside it in careful blue ink. My name and a number, and one line that says $20. That's yours, my mother says, close to my ear. Nobody else's. You're the responsible one, Ingrid. I always knew it would be you. I held that book like it was a living thing. I was the daughter who got taken to the bank. Not my brother, me. For 27 years, whenever my mother made me feel like the spare part of the family, the one who came up only when there was a bill to split, I could open a drawer and put my thumb on that blue cover and remember that once, before everything, she chose me. She said it out loud. You're the responsible one. If you have ever been the afterthought in your own family, the name that only surfaces when something needs paying for, then you already know the exact room I'm about to walk you into, and you know the smell of it. Stay with me through this one. My name is Ingrid, I'm 36, and I have spent 14 years finding out who really signed for things. I had never once turned that on the people who raised me. Tell me in the comments if you can already see where this is going, because I promise you I couldn't, and I do this for a living. You should understand how the accounting of my family worked, because everything grew out of it. There were two children. My brother Dale was the one with plans. I was the one who was fine. That was my role, and it was load-bearing. Ingrid is fine. Ingrid doesn't need. When Dale wrecked his first car, the family pooled for another, and when I asked at 19 why my student loans were somehow in collections when I'd never missed a payment, my mother told me I'd always been careless with paperwork and let it go, sweetheart. You'll only upset yourself. When Dale bought the bar, a tired place called Sully's off the interstate, sticky floors and a good sign, my parents co-signed and celebrated. When I mentioned once that my credit score sat 60 points lower than it had any right to for a woman who'd never carried a balance, my father looked at me over his glasses and said, "Some people are just bad with money, Ingrid. It's nothing to be ashamed of." I believed them. That's the part I need you to sit with, because it's the part I'm angriest about. I read credit files for a living, and I believed the people who raised me when they told me mine was my own fault. It never once occurred to me to ask why the one child who could read the machine was the only one it kept quietly eating. Then came the Sunday I brought the statements. I found out about the loans the boring way, which is the way most catastrophes actually arrive. A collections notice, forwarded from an address I'd left years ago for a personal loan I had never taken. Then, when I logged in and looked, really looked, with the part of my brain I rent to the bureau all week, there were 7. 7 loans and lines, opened across 3 years, every one of them now in default, every one of them tied to an account number that traced, when I followed it the way I follow things, to the operating account for Sully's, my brother's bar. $84,000 had been borrowed against my name and poured, a keg at a time, into a failing business off exit 9. I printed the statements, I put them in a folder, and instead of calling the fraud unit that first night, I did the stupidest, most human thing I have ever done. I drove 40 minutes to my mother's house on a Sunday, because some 9-year-old still living in my chest believed that if I laid it out clearly enough, they would be sorry. The house smelled like pot roast and lemon polish. My father was already at the table. Dale was there with a beer he hadn't opened, turning it in slow circles on the wood. Kayla wasn't there that night. Dale had come with just the 2 kids, who were in the den with a movie on. My mother was carrying in the potatoes when I set the folder down beside my plate and said, quietly, so the grandchildren in the other room wouldn't hear, that we needed to talk about something before we ate. She looked at the folder the way you look at a thing a cat has dragged in. I opened it anyway. I laid the statements out. I kept my voice flat and kind, the bureau voice, the floor for you to stand on voice, and I walked them through it. 7 loans. My name. Dale's account. I did not raise my voice. I did not say the word fraud. I said, I think we need to fix this together before it becomes something none of us can fix. My mother picked up the top statement. She looked at it for a moment, and then without a word, she folded it in half, then in half again. She creased it with her thumbnail, a neat little square, and she set it down under her sweating water glass like a coaster she'd been kneading, and she smoothed the tablecloth on either side of it the way she used to smooth my hair before church. "We're not doing this at my table," she said. Across from me, Dale turned his unopened beer a quarter turn and studied the label like it was going to be on a test. "Dale," I looked right at him. "It's your account, say something." I didn't look up. My father reached across all of it, past the folder, past my face, and took the bowl of potatoes and started spooning them onto his plate, and the little scrape of the serving spoon against the china was, I swear to you, the loudest thing in the room. "Ingrid." My mother said my name the way you'd lean over a birthday cake to blow out the candle. Soft. Final. A little wet at the edges with patience. "Look at yourself. You're 36 years old and you're alone. No husband, no children. What do you even need credit for?" She tipped her chin toward my brother without looking at him, the way you'd point at the sun. "He has a family. He has 3 mouths and a business and a mortgage. You have, what? An apartment and a savings account." She smiled at me then, and here's the thing I need you to understand. It was almost tender. "Let it go, sweetheart. Family doesn't sue family. It'll all come out even in the end. Come out even." I looked at the water ring spreading into the folded square of my own bank statement. I thought about the blue passbook at home in my kitchen drawer, the first account I ever had, opened for me at a marble counter by this same woman when I was small enough to need a stool. I thought about 60 points of credit score I could never explain, and student loans that went to collections while I paid them, and every "it's nothing to be ashamed of" my father had ever handed me like a coat. I didn't argue. I have learned, in 14 years, that arguing is the thing they feed on. An argument is a meal. Silence they don't know how to eat. "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry I brought it to the table." My mother's whole face softened with relief, and she reached over and patted my hand, and told me I'd always been the reasonable one, and asked if I wanted white meat or dark. And I sat there and ate pot roast with the people who had emptied me out, and I passed the salt, and I complimented the potatoes, and the entire time one clean, cold sentence was assembling itself behind my eyes, where none of them could see it. I would pull the originals, not the statements, not the summaries anyone could log in and read, the originals, the actual applications, with the actual signature lines, the documents a lender is required to keep and a fraud investigator is entitled to request. Because a summary tells you what was borrowed. An original tells you who was in the room. That is where I made my first mistake, if you can call it that. I thought I was going to find out how they'd done it. I had no idea I was about to find out who else they'd done it to. I put in the request Monday morning, from my own desk, on my own login, the way I'd done 10,000 times for strangers. The bank's fraud liaison was a woman named Denise who I'd worked cases with for years, dry and quick, the kind of colleague you trust because she never pretends a thing is fine when it isn't. I sent her the account numbers and asked for the full origination packets, all 7. She wrote back in under a minute. "Just you asking," she typed, "or is this official?" I looked at that question for a long moment. Because it wasn't the question you ask when you're about to send someone their own paperwork. It was the question you ask when you've already glanced at a file and seen something that made you want to know who was standing behind it. I typed back, "Official." Then I sat in the gray light of my monitor with my heart going like a fist on a door, and I waited for 7 pieces of paper that were going to take my whole life apart, and eventually hand it back to me built right. Denise sent the packets over 2 days later, encrypted, with a note that just said, "Call me when you've looked, not before." I opened them at my desk with my door shut. I want to explain what I saw, because to me it wasn't abstract. It was a language I read fluently, and it was screaming. A loan application has a shape. There's the primary borrower. That was me, my name, my social, an address I'd lived at during the years in question. All of it clean enough to sail through an underwriter's screen because half of it was true. And then, on higher limit products, there's a second line. A co-applicant. A joint account holder. Somebody whose credit gets stapled to yours to lift the whole thing over the bar. All 7 of mine had that second line filled in. The first thing a normal person would do is read the name. The first thing I did was read the number. Because I don't trust names, I trust the 9 digits underneath them. and the 9 digits underneath the second signature were the same on all 7 applications, and they were not mine. And this is the part where I put my coffee down. They belonged to a credit file that barely existed. I pulled it. I had the standing to. A commingled identity on an active fraud case is squarely mine to examine. And what came back was a file so thin it was almost nothing. No mortgage history, no decade of cards, no student loans, no auto notes, no old addresses stacking up like tree rings. Just these 7 accounts, blooming out of nowhere across 3 recent years, and behind them a single data point that stopped my hands where they were. The file establishment date. The day this person first existed, as far as the credit system is concerned. It was recent. Wildly, impossibly recent for someone carrying $84,000 in signed debt. A file that knew belongs to exactly 2 kinds of people. The first is an immigrant who just arrived and started from zero. The second is a child. I sat there with the second file open on one monitor and the 7 applications on the other, and I did the arithmetic that my whole career is built on. The quiet subtraction that turns a social security number into a human age, and when the number came back, I felt the room tip a few degrees, the way a floor does when it's deciding something without asking you. Whoever had signed the second line under my name, 7 times, in that small, careful hand, the letters set down one at a time, the way you write when writing is still work, was not old enough to have a checking account. I didn't call Denise that afternoon. I closed my door tighter, and I opened one more field, and I went looking for where this brand new, buried, borrowed against little person had come into the world. You have to understand that a social security number issued after 2011 doesn't tell you a birth year the old way. They randomize the assignment, so you can't just read the age off the digits anymore. Amateurs think you can. I don't guess. I pull the verification trail, the first date the number was ever validated against the Social Security Administration's records, the first time it touched a system anywhere. For most of us, that trail is decade-long and boring. For this file, the number had first been verified exactly once before the loans, years earlier, through a hospital's newborn enrollment. The program where a parent, in the first soft days after a birth, checks a box, and the state issues a social to a person who cannot yet hold up their own head. The number was issued the year my niece was born. I know that sounds like I leapt. I didn't. I want to walk you through the floor, giving way one board at a time, because that's how it actually went. First, the second SSN belonged to a small child. Second, the file, thin as it was, carried one linked address in its history. An authorized user tie, the kind that forms when someone adds a minor to an account to build their credit, a thing well-meaning grandparents do all the time. Third, that address was my brother's house. And fourth, when I made myself open the identity record all the way, when I made myself read the name printed under my own on 7 loan applications, in that small, careful, 1 letter-at-a-time hand, it was Josie, my brother's youngest, 6 years old in a week, the one with the gap in her front teeth who calls me Aunt Ingy, and once cried at Thanksgiving because I had to leave before the pie. Josie, whose whole credit life had been born, buried, and borrowed against before she could spell her own last name. I sat very still. I didn't cry. I've told you already this isn't a story about a woman who cries, and I need it to stay true, because what happened in me wasn't sadness. It was colder and more useful than that. My mother's voice arrived in the room uninvited, that soft, candle-blowing voice from the Sunday table. He has children. What do you need credit for? He has children. She'd said it to me like a door closing. Like children were the reason to leave my brother alone, the sacred thing you don't touch. She had it exactly backwards, and she knew it, and she'd said it to my face over pot roast. The children weren't the reason to spare him. In this family, the children were the inventory. A fresh social security number is the cleanest thing in the world. No history, no red flags, a blank sheet a lender will trust because it has never once been given a reason not to. My mother hadn't been protecting Josie behind that sentence. She'd been spending her. I went to the in-person appointment because Denise asked me to, and because there are things you should be sitting down for, even when you already know them. The fraud unit is a windowless room that smells like carpet and burnt coffee, and Denise had the packet in a folder squared up on the table, and she didn't slide it across right away. She looked at me first, the way one professional looks at another when the file is about to stop being professional. "You already know," she said. "Tell me anyway." She turned it around and pushed it the last few inches, and there it was under the fluorescent light. My signature, forged 7 times. And under it, 7 times, in crayon careful capitals, a kindergarten teacher would praise my niece's name. Denise had circled the establishment date in red. She'd circled the co-applicant age field, where the system, doing its dumb honest arithmetic, had populated a 3-year-old as the joint holder on an $18,000 line of credit. "In 11 years I've never sent this one up the chain," Denise said quietly. "A minor this young layered under an adult primary in the same household, money routing to a single business. That's not somebody skimming. That's a build. Somebody who knows how the scoring works, who knows to season the accounts before they bust them out." She tapped the page. "Ingrid, whoever did this has done it before. You don't get this clean on your first one. You don't get this clean on your first one." I heard it land somewhere very old in me. I thought about 60 points of score I could never explain. I thought about student loans and collections that I had paid every month of. I thought about a woman at a marble counter telling a 9-year-old she was the responsible one, and a small blue book with my name in careful blue ink, one letter at a time, the way you write when writing is still work. The same hand, I was looking at the same hand. "Denise," I said, and my voice did the flat thing again, level as a countertop while the floor did whatever it was doing. "I need to pull a file, not a current one." I made myself say the rest of it. "I need my own, everything, all the way back to 1999. She didn't ask why. She's read 10,000 of these too. She just looked at me for a second longer than she needed to. And then she nodded, and something in her face had already gone gentle in the specific way we're trained to go gentle, right before we hand someone the worst page in their file. The live report only goes back 7 years. Negative marks age off. That's the law. That's the mercy built into the system. You're allowed to outrun your worst season. Most people, when they think about their credit history, are thinking about that 7-year window, the polite version, the one that forgets. I don't work the polite version, I work the archive. Underneath the report everyone's allowed to see, there is older data, suppressed, aged out of display, retained in the deep records that a special investigations analyst can reach when a fraud case gives her cause. It's where the system keeps what it's no longer allowed to hold against you. I had spent 14 years down there in the dark of other people's histories, reading the accounts that were supposed to be forgotten. I had never once gone down there for myself. Why would I? I knew my own story. I was just bad with money. My mother had told me so, kindly, my whole life. It took the archive request 3 days to come back, and I don't want to pretend I was calm during them. I'd like to tell you I ran the case clean and detached the whole time, but I didn't sleep much, and I found myself standing in my kitchen at odd hours with the drawer open, my thumb on the blue cover of that passbook, not reading it, just touching it, the way you'd touch a bruise to check if it was still yours. I used the waiting to do the thing I do know how to do. I built the case. I drove past Sully's on a Tuesday, not to go in, just to look, and it told me everything. Half the letters in the sign were dark. A hand-lettered sheet in the window advertised a happy hour that started at 11 in the morning. Whatever $84,000 had gone into, it hadn't gone into the floors, which were still sticky, or the roof, which still sagged. The money hadn't saved the bar. The bar was just the drain the money ran down. And I drove past my brother's house, and I saw my sister-in-law, Kayla, out at the mailbox. I need to be careful about Kayla, because it would be easy to make her part of it, and she wasn't. She married into this family the way you'd wander into a current, thinking it was a calm stream. She was standing at the mailbox in the last light with a stack of envelopes fanned in her hand, and she wasn't flipping through them the bored way you flip junk mail. She was staring at one of them. She turned it over, and turned it back, and stood there in the driveway holding it like it had a weight the paper couldn't account for. Then she looked up the street, quick, the way you look when you don't want to be caught wondering something. I slowed and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel, the neighbor wave, and she waved back and made herself smile, and I drove on. Whatever was in that envelope, addressed to her house, she had not shown it to my brother. I filed that away without knowing yet what it was worth. My archive file came back on a Thursday night. I opened it at the kitchen table under the same lamp, in the same chair, the passbook drawer at my back. I scrolled down past the 7-year line, into the dark, into the part the world is supposed to have forgotten about me. There was an account down there I had never opened. Original creditor, a finance company that doesn't exist under that name anymore. Opened at a branch on 3rd Street. Charged off, and then, a year later, a small claims judgment. The kind of public record that doesn't get to age off the way a late payment does. The kind that just sits in the county's memory forever, patient as a stone. I put my finger on this open date on the screen, the way you'd put your finger on a name on a headstone. The year was 1999. I was 9 years old. I want to tell you, I understood it all at once. But understanding came in the wrong order, the way it does when the thing you're understanding is your whole life. First, I was just an analyst, noting an anomaly. A charge-off predating the borrower's legal capacity. Fraud. Textbook. I've seen 1,000. Then the branch name went through me a second time. 3rd Street. And the month went through me. And I got up from the table, because my body knew before I did, and I went to the drawer, and I took out the blue passbook, and I opened it to the first page where my name is printed in careful blue ink, one letter at a time. The date inside the passbook and the open date on the defaulted loan were the same month of the same year. I sat back down. I put the passbook next to the laptop, the little book beside the cold archive of what the little book had really been. Here is what actually happened at that marble counter when I was 9, told correctly this time. My mother did not take me to open a savings account. My mother took me to a branch where a finance company shared a desk, and she used the warm, once-in-a-lifetime, just-us-two ritual. The stool, the brass pen on its chain. You're the responsible one. I always knew it would be you. To keep a 9-year-old smiling and still and cooperative while my identity was walked across the room and signed onto a loan. The $20 was real. $20 is a cheap price for a clean Social Security number and a child who will hold perfectly still because her mother's hand is proud on her shoulder. The passbook was the toy they give you so you don't look at the needle. I had kept it for 27 years. I had pressed my thumb to that blue cover on every bad night of my adult life and let it tell me that once, before everything, I was chosen. You're the responsible one. She hadn't been choosing me. She'd been marking the register. I didn't cry. Something worse than crying happened, quieter and with no tears in it at all. I sat at that table and I felt 27 years reorganize themselves behind my eyes. Every apartment I didn't get. Every rate that came back higher than it should have for a woman who paid on time. 60 points of score I'd carried like a character flaw, like proof of some sloppiness in me, some fundamental unseriousness. And I'd believed it. I'd sat across from my own father while he said some people are just bad with money, and I'd nodded, because who was I to argue with the record? I read records for a living, and the record said I was careless. The record was a crime scene, and I'd been living inside it, apologizing for the chalk outline. My hands were flat on the table. I looked at them for a while. Then I said one word out loud, to the empty kitchen, to the lamp, to the two little books side by side. I said her name, my mother's name, just once, low, like a question I already had the answer to. And that was the closest I came to breaking, that one word in an empty room, and then it passed, and what was left when it passed was the coldest, cleanest thing I have ever felt. Because here is what changed at that table, the reason this is the exact middle of the story, and not the end. Up until that night, I thought I was in a fight to get $84,000 off my name. A dispute. A big, ugly, painful dispute with people I was related to. The kind that ends with lawyers and estrangement and everybody telling their version at holidays. If that had been all of it, I might have done what my mother wanted. I might have let it come out even. People do. You'd be amazed what people let their families keep, just to still have a family. But it wasn't a dispute anymore. I wasn't the plaintiff. I was the oldest exhibit. This was a machine, and it had been running in my family for at least 27 years, and it did exactly one thing. It found the youngest, cleanest, most trusting person at the table, and it drank them dry before they were old enough to read the paperwork. It had done it to me at 9. It was doing it to Josie at 3, at 4, at 5. And my mother had sat across a pot roast and told me, to my face, which child was next in line, and called it love. He has children. She'd meant it as a boundary. She'd meant, leave your brother alone, he's protected, he's got the sacred thing. She had never once imagined that the daughter she'd bled at 9 had grown up into the one person in the state of paying attention who could read the machine blueprint by blueprint, and would. So I stopped being the victim in this story. Right there at the table, with the passbook open, I put myself on the other side of the desk, where I've sat my whole career, and I looked at my own family the way I'd look at any case, cold, patient, and by the book. Because I was going to do this the way I do everything, which meant I was not going to give them one single thing to deny. I'm going to stop here for a second, because I need to ask you something, and I need to ask it before I show you the rest. If you think you already know the worst thing in this story, the cruelest thing these people did, tell me now. Put it in the comments before I go any further, because I'd love to know what you're bracing for, and I promise it's going to move. I spent weeks believing this was about $84,000 and a bar off exit 9. It was never about the money. If you have ever found out that something you were handed to be proud of was the exact spot where they picked your pocket, a gift, a compliment, a ritual, your name in careful blue ink, then you already understand why I stopped shaking that night and got very, very quiet. Stay in that quiet with me. It's where I did my best work. The next morning I went back down into the archive. This time I wasn't looking for me. I was looking for how many of us there had been. I couldn't pull just anyone's file. The law that lets me into the dark for a fraud case keeps me out of it for a family tree, and I wasn't going to build this on a single thing I didn't have the right to touch, because a case you built wrong is a case they walk away from. But I had my own history, and my own history had names in it, addresses shared, old joint accounts, the ordinary lattice a family leaves in the records without meaning to. And I had a brother whose social had been beside mine on things when we were kids, the way siblings get. Dale had an account down there too, opened when he was 8, charged off. Same finance company, before it changed its name. A different 3rd Street, a different year, the same brass pen. I sat with that for a while, and it rearranged him for me the way the passbook had rearranged me. My brother, who wouldn't look up from his unopened beer, while our mother called me alone and childless over a folder full of my own stolen name. I had spent that whole dinner furious at his silence. Now I understood it was the silence of a person sitting very still while someone's proud hand is on his shoulder. They'd done it to him first, at 8, and then, this is the part the machine is genius at, they hadn't discarded him. They'd promoted him. They'd handed the kid they drained a bar to run, and a way to feel like the favorite, and all it cost him was helping route the next round of money down the same drain. My mother didn't raise an accomplice. She raised a victim and gave him an apron and let him think the apron made him management. I felt something for Dale in that moment that I have had to work very hard to keep hold of since, because it would be so much simpler to only hate him. He was the machines the same as me. The difference between us is that they broke him young enough to keep, and me they broke and lost, because they made the one mistake the truly arrogant always make. They taught a child to hold perfectly still and be responsible, and then they were surprised when she grew up and did the responsible thing. Here was the problem, though, and I want you to sit in it with me, because it's the fork the whole rest of this turned on. If I cleared myself, I saved myself, that's all. I'd file my affidavit, block the 84,000, walk away clean, and it would take me maybe 3 weeks. But the machine doesn't need my name to run. It needs a clean, trusting social in the household. And there was one sitting right there, 6 years old, gap in her front teeth, already loaded onto 7 accounts, and good for years of seasoning before the next bust out. If I saved only myself, I handed them Josie with a bow on her. The kindest thing I could do for that little girl was the one thing my instinct screamed against. I could not go first. I had to protect the child before I saved myself, or saving myself was just clearing the road for them. And I couldn't protect Josie alone. That's the wall I hit at midnight, reading the statute I already knew by heart. A minor's credit freeze. The thing that would slam the door on Josie's file, that has been free and available since 2018 for exactly this, can only be placed by the child's parent or legal guardian. I am her aunt. In the eyes of the system that I serve, I am no one to her. The law that my whole life had reduced me to a woman with no husband and no children, and nothing to protect, was now the same law telling me, precisely, that I had no standing to protect her. Her mother did. Kayla did. So I went to see Kayla, and I made myself a plan for how to tell a woman that her in-laws had been farming her daughter's future, and possibly that her husband had known. And every version of the plan was terrible. I sat in her driveway for a full minute working up to it. I didn't need any of the plan. She opened the door before I knocked. She'd seen me pull up, and she stood there in the doorway with a shoebox in her hands, an actual shoebox, the kind you keep photos in, and her face was the face of someone who's been carrying something alone for weeks and has just seen, coming up the walk, the one person who might be able to lift the other end. "Ingrid," she said. Her voice wasn't steady the way mine goes. It was the opposite. "You work at the credit place, the fraud part, right? Dale said you did." She looked back over her shoulder into the house, quick, that same driveway glance I'd seen at the mailbox. And then she stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door most of the way shut behind her, and she held out the shoebox. "Then can you please tell me why my 6-year-old has been getting credit card offers since she was 4? I opened the box on her porch steps. It was all there, in her careful keeping. Months of it. Pre-approval offers addressed to a kindergartner. A billing statement she'd opened by accident because it looked like a utility. And underneath, the thing that had made her turn an envelope over and over at the mailbox in the last light, a collections notice for a line of credit, in the name of Josie, our Josie, past due. "I asked Dale," Kayla said, and now her voice did break, just once, on his name. "When the first ones came, I showed him. He told me it was junk mail. Everybody gets it. The marketing companies buy kid lists, throw it away." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I threw them away for a year. Then they stopped looking like junk." She looked at me. And here's the sentence that told me she was not part of it. The sentence I will trust to my grave. "Ingrid, I don't understand any of this. I just need somebody to make it stop before it follows her into being a grown-up. That's all I want. I don't care whose fault it is. Make it stop." I did care whose fault it was. That was the difference between us, and it was about to matter. But I looked at that shoebox full of a mother's fear, kept and sorted and hidden from her own husband, and I understood that I had just been handed two things I could not have gotten any other way. I'd been handed a guardian with standing, and I'd been handed a clean, dated, independently collected record of the fraud, kept by someone with no reason to lie, no login, no access, no way to have manufactured it. I hadn't found an ally. I'd found the one witness the machine had never thought to check for, the mother who kept the mail. "Kayla," I said, "I can make it stop. Today, this week, for good. But I have to tell you where it's coming from, and I need you to stay standing when I do." I took a breath. "And I need to ask you not to say a word to Dale, or to his parents, until Sunday." I told her on the porch steps, plainly, the way I'd tell a stranger. Because Kayla deserved the floor to stand on voice more than anyone I'd ever used it on. I told her the second name on my loans was her daughter's. I told her about the establishment date and the hospital enrollment and the 27 years. I did not tell her yet what I suspected about Dale. That he'd known. That he'd told her to throw the letters away because he knew exactly what they were. Because I needed her steady for 4 more days, and grief is steadier than betrayal. She sat down on the step. She didn't cry either. I think that's why I trusted her. We recognized each other's particular way of going quiet. Then we got to work, and this is the part I need you to see clearly, because it's the part that makes everything after it stick. I did not freeze Josie's credit for her. I couldn't, and I wouldn't have if I could. A freeze I placed would be a freeze they could challenge. Aunt overstepping, no standing, thrown out. So I sat beside Kayla at her own kitchen table, and I walked her through doing it herself, her hand on the mouse, her information verifying her as the parent. I read her the steps I've read to 100 strangers, and she placed the freeze on her daughter's file with her own 2 hands, and when the confirmation came up she read it out loud, and her voice finally shook. It says it's protected now. She looked at me. Is it really? It really is, I said. Nobody opens anything in her name again without you. Not a marketing company, not a lender. I didn't say the last part out loud. Not your husband, not his mother. But I placed it in the room between us, and Kayla heard it because she reached over and put her hand flat on the table the way I do, the brace, and left it there. Then she filed the parents' identity theft report for Josie, her name on it, her account, and I filed mine, and the case numbers came back like two keys cut for the same lock. It matters, in the end, who does the filing. It's the difference between a woman with a grievance and a case with a spine. I want to tell you it went smoothly and quietly from there to Sunday. It did not. That was a Thursday. And by that same night, my mother had found out I was still looking. I'll never know exactly how. Maybe the bank's inquiry rippled somewhere she could feel it. Maybe Dale noticed his statements had gone strange. Maybe Kayla was quiet in a way that told him something, and he told his mother, the way he's told his mother everything his whole managed life. However it reached her, my phone rang Thursday night, and it was her, and her voice had changed keys. It wasn't the candle-blowing voice anymore. That one's for when she thinks she's winning. This was the other one, the warm one with the floor under it gone, the one she uses maybe twice a decade, and I had heard it exactly once before, the year I almost moved across the country, and she needed me not to. Ingrid, sweetheart. A breath. I know you're hurting. I know your father and I have not always made you feel chosen. I know that. Oh, she was good. She'd found the exact word. Chosen. But I need you to think about what you're doing. If you take this to those people at your work, if you make it official, your brother goes to prison. Do you understand that? Dale goes to prison, and Kayla is alone with two babies, and those children lose their father over paperwork, over money, over a thing we can fix at home like a family. Is that what you want? To do that to the children? Her voice dropped, tender, terrible. You of all people. You know what it is to grow up without enough. Do you really want to hand that to Josie and Eli? The children. Think of the children. She reached for them like a shield in the exact breath she was still holding the knife. I closed my eyes in my kitchen, and I let the silence stretch, because I've learned what silence does to people who need you to react. And in the quiet, I did the coldest arithmetic of my life. I could tell her, right then, that I'd already frozen Josie's file, that the reports were already filed, that the machine was already dead, and she just didn't know it yet. I could win the phone call, or I could let her keep believing she was managing me. The reasonable one, the responsible one, the daughter who folds, for 3 more days, and give her the party. You're right, I said. My voice came out perfect, level as a countertop. I don't want to blow up the family. I've been so angry, Mom, and you're right. Let's fix it at home. I let a breath catch, gave her the sound of a daughter folding, the sound she'd been collecting off me my whole life. Josie's birthday's Sunday, right? Everybody'll be there. Let me come. Let me talk to Dale in person with all of us together. I don't want to do this over the phone. I want to do it as a family. The relief in her voice could have powered the house. Oh, sweetheart, she said. Oh, yes, yes. Come Sunday. We'll all be together. It's Josie's day. We'll keep it light, and then we'll sort the grown-up things after the cake. A pause, and then she said it. And I want you to hear it exactly the way it came down the line. Warm and pleased and certain. Good girl, I knew you'd come around. You always were the reasonable one, Ingrid. The reasonable one. First cousin to the responsible one. 27 years apart, the same hand, reaching for the same still cooperative child. I always was, I said, and I hung up, and I sat in the dark, and I did not feel like a good girl. I felt like a locksmith who has just been told, by the person who broke into the house, exactly which door to be standing behind. I had 3 days. I spent them building the only thing that ends a machine like this for good, which is not a feeling, and not a speech, and not a fair fight. It's a record so clean and so cold that no amount of Butwer family can melt it. The first thing I did wasn't build the case. The first thing I did was make sure I couldn't be the reason it died, because I have watched more good cases die of the investigator than of the criminal, and I was not going to hand my mother that mercy. I know exactly how these end when they end wrong. It's not that the fraud can't be proven. It's that somewhere down the line a lawyer stands up and says the person who found it had a grudge and a password, that she went digging in privileged records because she hated her family, that the whole thing is a vendetta dressed up as an investigation, that the data is fruit of a poisoned tree. And a judge who doesn't want to referee a family war grants it, and the file gets suppressed, and the machine that ate two children walks out the front door because the one person who understood it loved the victims too much to be allowed near it. I'd seen it happen to other people's cases. I was not going to author it into my own. So I did the single hardest thing that has ever been asked of a woman who needs to hold the wheel. I took my hands off. I went to my supervisor and I disclosed the conflict myself, in writing, before anyone had to catch me at it. I told her the subject of an active fraud pattern was my own family, that I had already touched my own archived file, and that I was recusing from the matter entirely as an analyst. I flagged my own access. I put my job on the table to do it. You don't tell the fraud bureau you went looking in the deep records for your own last name and walk away clean, and I knew that, and I did it anyway, because a case you're allowed to be proud of is worth less than nothing if it can't stand up when they push. Only the ones you build with your hands tied behind you hold. Then I rebuilt the whole thing from the outside, as what I actually was. Not the investigator, the victim, and the aunt of the next one. Everything that mattered, I had the standing to gather as a private person with a stolen name. My own file is mine by right. My own affidavit is mine to file, and the 7 applications belong to a fraud on me that any consumer can demand. The polls I couldn't touch, I didn't touch. Denise ran them from the bank, clean hands, a separate institution, no blood in it. Kayla pulled her own children's files as their mother. Not one page in that folder was gathered by the woman who hated them. Every page was gathered by someone the law says had every right to hold it, and dated and logged, and impossible to wave away as a grudge with a login. It cost me to build it that way. It was slower, and it meant trusting other hands with the most important thing I have ever carried, and trust is not my native language. But when I was done, I had the one thing my mother could not survive, and could not settle, and could not fold: a case with no me in it to attack. She could call me jealous. She could call me alone, childless, sick with envy, in front of the whole backyard. And it wouldn't matter, because I wasn't the evidence. The dates were the evidence, and the dates had been pulled by people with no reason on earth to lie. I laid it out on my kitchen table, the same table, under the same lamp, and I built it the way I'd build it for a stranger whose life I was trying to give back. Page 1. Josie's bureau file. Her social security number, with the verification trail showing it first came into existence the summer she was born. Under it, the accounts. Dates in a neat column. The earliest one opened when the joint holder was, per the system's own honest math, 3 years old. A 3-year-old on an $18,000 line. I didn't have to write a single accusing word. The dates are the accusation. A date can't be cross-examined. Page 2, my file. 1999, the 3rd Street branch, the charge-off, the judgment, the whole quiet crime laid in the archive where the world was supposed to forget it. And beside the open date, in the margin, one thing I did add, because it was true and provable and I had it: the date on the first page of a small blue passbook, the same month. The toy and the needle, documented, side by side. Page 3, the 7 applications, my forged name on top, Josie's careful capitals underneath, and the routing, every dollar, tracing down to a single operating account for a bar off exit 9. And then I did the thing that took the most out of me, because I had to be sure, and being sure meant looking. Kayla, at my instruction, in her home, with her standing, pulled Eli's file too. Her 9-year-old, the older one. Eli's file was clean. I sat with that for a long time, and it was the closest the whole case came to breaking me a second way, because a clean file on a 9-year-old told me one exact thing. They hadn't started on him yet. Josie was 6 and already loaded. Eli was 9 and still blank, which meant they weren't harvesting at random. They were choosing. They'd looked at 2 children in the same house and picked the younger, the newer, the one with more years of trust left to spend. And they were saving the older one for later, the way you don't slaughter the whole herd in one season. There was a schedule. My mother had a schedule for her grandchildren, and I was holding it. That was the night I finally understood the shape of my own life. And I'm going to tell you the truth about it, because I've told you the truth about everything else. I did not feel triumphant. I sat in my kitchen with the cleanest case of my career spread in front of me, and I felt 9 years old. I felt every year I'd apologized for being bad with money. I felt the whole long, low hum of coming up short and never knowing why, the not enough that had followed me into every apartment and every relationship and every quiet Sunday, when I told myself the reason I was always the one who was fine was that I just didn't need as much as other people. I got up and I took the passbook out of the drawer. I sat back down with it. I opened it to my name in careful blue ink, and I put my thumb on it the way I had 10,000 nights, and for the first time in 27 years, it didn't comfort me, and it didn't lie to me either. It just told me the truth. Somebody wrote my name in this book so I'd hold still. I said it out loud, once, to the empty kitchen. I was a baby. That was all. 4 words, and my voice came apart on the last one, just for a second, the only time in this whole story the countertop cracked. I was a baby and they used me. Then it passed, the way it does, and I wiped my face with the back of my hand, and I picked the passbook up and I did not put it back in the drawer. I set it on top of the folder, because I was going to bring it. Not as evidence. The bureau printouts were the evidence, cold and dated and undeniable. The passbook was something else. The passbook was for me, and it was for Josie, and it was the one thing on that table that could do at a birthday party what a printout can't, which is make 25 people feel, in their stomachs, before anyone said a word, exactly how young you have to be chosen for this. I put the whole thing together Saturday night. The 3 pages, the 7 originals, the 2 case numbers, and one more sheet, folded once and set at the bottom, that I'm not going to describe to you yet, except to say that what it recorded had gone into effect 2 days earlier, on the Thursday, and it changed what was possible in the world, and I slid it under everything else, so that it would be the last thing, not the first. I set the folder by the door. I laid the passbook on top. By the time I parked outside my brother's house on Sunday afternoon, with the balloons already tied to the mailbox, and a bounce house inflating crooked in the side yard, and my mother's car gleaming in the driveway, one thing in that folder was already true, and quietly, permanently, legally true. And not one person walking around that backyard in a party hat had any idea. I carried the folder in a canvas tote, the boring kind. The kind that says I brought a hostess gift. The passbook I slid into my jacket pocket against my chest. There were more people than I'd expected. 25, maybe more. Josie's whole kindergarten class, it looked like. And their parents standing in loose clumps holding red cups. And the aunts and the cousins and 2 neighbors, and a folding table groaning under a sheet cake with a cartoon fox on it. Josie saw me first. She came across the grass at a dead run in a paper crown, gap-toothed, shrieking Aunt Ingy, and she hit my legs and hugged them, and I put my hand on her hair, the way you'd put your hand on something you'd walked through fire to keep, and I thought, I am not going to let this be a thing that happened to you. You will not spend 27 years pressing your thumb to a lie. My mother was holding court by the cake. She saw me over the heads of the children, and her whole face arranged itself into welcome, warm and public and certain, the candle-blowing voice made visible. She came to me with both hands out. "There she is," she said, loud enough for the nearest cluster of parents to turn and smile. "My daughter, everybody. Ingrid, she works with computers, she's the smart one, and she came all this way." She took my hands in both of hers and squeezed, and she leaned in and said, "Just for me, warm as anything. I'm so glad you came to your senses, sweetheart. We'll do the cake, and the kids'll do the bounce house, and then you and Dale and your father and I will step inside and fix the grown-up things, quietly, like a family." She patted my cheek. "You always were the reasonable one." And then she turned to her audience and said the thing that decided the shape of the next 10 minutes, because it was the lie, out loud in front of everyone, and it handed me the room. "Family's everything," my mother announced, to the parents, to the cousins, to the whole sunny yard. She had her arm around Josie now, who was wriggling to get back to her friends. That's what we always say. We take care of our own. Nobody in this family ever goes without, not while I'm alive to see to it. She smiled down at my niece and pressed a kiss to the top of the paper crown. Especially the babies. The babies are everything. The babies are everything. I set my tote down on the end of the folding table, next to the cake, and I took out the folder, and I did not raise my voice. I have never once raised my voice in this story, and I wasn't going to start at a 6-year-old's birthday. I just opened it, and I laid the first page down on the tablecloth where the light was good, and I said, "In the floor for you to stand on voice, the bureau voice, the one I'd used on a 68-year-old stranger, and never once on my own blood. Since the babies are everything, Mom, let's talk about Josie's credit file." The parents nearest us went still the polite the way you do when you think you've overheard the start of a family thing you shouldn't be hearing. "This is her social security number." I put my finger on it. My voice stayed level and it stayed clear and it carried, because a backyard goes quiet faster than you'd think when one person refuses to whisper. "It was issued the summer she was born, 6 years ago. That's normal. It happens at the hospital. What's not normal is this column." I moved my finger down. "These are accounts opened in her name. The first one, right here, was opened when the person signing was 3 years old. $18,000 when she was 3. There are 7 in total, $84,000, and every dollar of it." I laid the third page beside the first. "Routed to the operating account for Sully's, the bar, off exit 9. Ingrid." My father was on his feet. I hadn't seen him get up. "That's enough." "You've lost your mind," my mother said, and the warmth was going out of her face like water out of a cracked glass. But she caught it. She was so good. She turned to her audience and gave a little laugh. A can you believe her laugh. She's. She doesn't have children of her own, you understand, and I think this is very hard for her. All of this. The family, the babies. She reached for the oldest knife she owned, and she used it in front of 25 people. She gets like this. She's alone, and she gets ideas, and she takes it out on the ones of us who have families. It's a sickness, honestly, this jealousy. It's a mix-up with the computers, and she's making it into, "Ingrid, put that away. You're frightening the children." She's jealous. She's alone. She has no children of her own. There it was, the wound, thrown down on the grass in front of everyone. The same blade she'd slid across the pot roast. And I want to tell you what it did to me, because it's not what she planned. She'd been cutting me with alone and childless my whole life, and every time it had made me smaller. This time it landed on a woman who had spent 3 weeks learning exactly what her being childless had made possible, and it didn't cut. It clarified. "You're right that I don't have children," I said. "Let's talk about why that matters to you." And I reached into my jacket, and I took out the passbook, and I set it down on the tablecloth next to Josie's file. It's a small thing, a child's passbook, faded blue, and I watched my mother's eyes go to it and change. The whole yard was quiet now. Even the bounce house had emptied. Kids drifting to the edges to find their parents, parents gone still with their red cups. That specific silence that falls when everyone has realized at once that this is not a family squabble. This is something with a floor missing under it. "This is mine," I said. "You opened it for me at the 3rd Street branch when I was 9 years old. You put me on a stool so I could reach. You told me I was the responsible one, that you always knew it would be me. I kept it for 27 years because it was the only proof I had that you ever chose me." I put the second page down beside it. My file, the archive. And this is what else got opened at that branch that month. A loan. In my name. When I was 9. Charged off. There's a judgment on it. It's public. Anyone here can look it up on their phone right now. Same finance company that's behind Josie's. Same trick. The account, and the little book to keep me smiling while it happened. I looked at her, and I said the sentence I'd built the whole case around. The one that a date can say and a person cannot deny. "It wasn't a stranger, Mom. It wasn't a mix-up. It was the same person twice. Me at 9, Josie at 3, 27 years apart, the same hand, the same branch, the same reason." I turned finally to the yard, to the parents holding their children a little closer without knowing yet why. That's what "he has kids" means in this family. It's not who we protect, it's who's next. The babies aren't everything. The babies are the inventory. She looked at two grandchildren in that house and picked the younger one because a younger one has more years left to borrow against, and she was saving the 9-year-old for after. Somebody's cup hit the grass. My mother's mouth opened, and nothing came out of it. I had waited my whole life to see it, and I'll be honest, it wasn't sweet. It was just quiet. The quiet of a thing being true, in a place where it can't be unsaid. Her mouth worked and no sound came, and my father sat down, not into a chair, just down, onto the edge of the picnic bench, like his legs had stopped taking instructions. And around the yard, one by one, the parents were doing a small, terrible arithmetic of their own. And I watched a mother near the fence crouch and murmur to her little boy and take his hand and start very casually toward the gate. That's when Dale finally moved. I'd been watching for it. He'd been standing at the back the whole time, by the cooler, holding a beer he hadn't opened. Of course he hadn't opened it. And his face through all of it had been the face from the pot roast, the face of a boy holding still under a proud hand. But when I said saving the 9-year-old for after, something went through him, because Eli is his, Eli is the 9-year-old, and I watched my brother understand for the first time that the schedule had his son's name on it too. He didn't shout at me. He turned to our mother. "What did she sign, Ma?" His voice was wrong, too flat, too quiet. The family voice, our voice, the countertop with the flood under it. "Kayla. What did Kayla sign for Josie? You told me it was handled. You told me it was. What did my wife sign?" And from across the yard, by the drinks table, Kayla said, clear as a bell, "Nothing, Dale." She had Josie's hand in hers. She'd already moved between her daughter and the cake. "That's the point. I never signed anything. Neither did she. That's how everybody knows." My mother lunged for the table. It was the only loud thing she did, and it told the whole story. She didn't reach for me. She didn't reach for the bureau printouts, the pages that were actually going to end her, the dated, damning, uncross-examinable pages. Her hand shot out and she snatched the passbook, the little blue book, the toy, the 27-year-old prop, and she clutched it to her chest with both hands and stood there in front of everyone gripping the one piece of paper on that table that proved nothing and meant everything, and she couldn't put it down, and she couldn't explain why she'd grabbed it. And in front of 25 people, her body had just answered every question her mouth wouldn't. I let her hold it. I didn't need it anymore. "You can keep that," I said. "I made copies of the part that matters." And then I reached into the bottom of the folder, and I took out the last page, the one I'd folded once and slid underneath everything else, the one that had been live since Thursday, and I unfolded it and I set it on top of the pile where the light was good. "Here's the part none of you knows yet," I said. "Josie's credit is frozen. Her mother did it, with her own hands, at her own kitchen table, 3 days ago. A parent's freeze, permanent. And there is nothing anyone in this family can do to lift it, but Kayla. Whatever you had planned for her next, it's already dead. It died Thursday, and you threw her a party over its grave." I looked at my father, still sitting where his legs had quit. "The 84,000 in my name is under a filed identity theft affidavit and a police report. I have the case number. It's real. It's stamped. It exists in a building with my mother's name in it now. And Eli's file is clean, and it is going to stay clean, because his mother is going to freeze it tomorrow, and I am going to help her, the way I help strangers every single day of my life. If you have made it this far into the yard with me, if you have ever been the one they called too alone, too childless, too far on the outside of the family to matter, and then found out you were the only adult standing between them and the people you love, then do one thing for me before I tell you how it ended. Subscribe and stay out here on the outside with me, where the light is good and you can see the whole table. That's where the gatekeepers have to stand. Nobody chooses it. You just look down one day and find the door's been yours the whole time." I picked up my folder. I left them the passbook. And I walked across the grass to where Kayla was standing with my niece. And I crouched down to Josie's height, to the paper crown and the gap in her teeth. And I asked her if she wanted to blow out her candles. She did. Of course she did. She was 6, and it was her party, and the terrible weather of the adults had rolled through above her head without ever quite touching her. which is the whole thing I'd been trying to buy. Kayla carried the fox cake to a quieter end of the table and lit the candles with a hand that only shook a little, and a few of the braver parents drifted back to sing because you cannot leave a child singing to herself. And Josie sucked in a huge breath and blew, and everybody clapped, and for about 90 seconds it was just a birthday. I have thought about those 90 seconds a lot since. They were the point. Everything cold I did so that a little girl could have a birthday she'll never remember for the right reasons. My parents were gone before the cake was cut. My mother left first, walking fast to her gleaming car, still holding the passbook. She took it with her, she never did put it down. And my father followed the way he's followed her for 40 years. A step behind, carrying nothing, deciding nothing. I thought that was the end of the loud part. It wasn't. There's always a second act with people like this, because people who mistake a family for a business always think there's a deal to be made. She called me at 9:40 that night. I let it ring twice. The voice was a new one, or an old one I'd only heard through walls. No candle in it, no floor gone soft. This was the one from underneath everything, and it wasn't asking. "You've destroyed this family," she said. "I hope you know that. I hope you can live with it. Your brother's business, your father's name in a police file at his age, all those people watching, for what? For a mistake from 20-odd years ago that you can't even prove was on purpose." A breath, and then the pivot I'd known was coming. Because it always comes, the moment the shield of the children stops working and the wallet comes out. "We'll pay it. The 84,000. We'll pay every cent, quietly, and you drop the reports, and we put this behind us. That's fair, Ingrid. That's more than fair. Let me fix this like an adult." There it was. Pay it back and make it disappear. It's such a reasonable sounding thing, and it is the exact mechanism by which every one of these machines has always survived. The quiet settlement, the family that handles it at home, the record that never gets made. Come out even. She'd been saying it my whole life, and I finally understood it was not a wish. It was a business model. Even is where the paperwork goes to die. "It's not mine to drop," I said. "That's the part you never understood about what I do. I don't own the case. Josie's report belongs to Josie. Eli's belongs to Eli. Mine, the 9-year-old's. She belongs to a record now, in a building, with a number. I couldn't make it come out even if I wanted to, Mom. I made sure of that on purpose. I built it so that not even I can fold." I heard her breathing. "You raised a daughter to hold perfectly still and be responsible. I grew up. That's all that went wrong for you. I grew up and I stayed responsible, and it turns out those two things together are the one thing you can't survive." She hung up on me. It was the kindest thing she'd done in a month. It meant she finally believed me. Dale came the next morning. He came to my apartment, which he had never once done in his life, and he stood in my doorway with his hands jammed in his pockets and his shoulders up around his ears, and he looked so much like the 8-year-old in that archive file that I had to hold the doorframe for a second. He didn't come to yell. He'd come because he'd lain awake all night doing the same arithmetic I'd done, and he'd landed somewhere. "Eli," he said. That was the first word. Not sorry, not why. Just his son's name, the way I'd said Josie's on the porch, the way our whole family says the name of the person we're trying to save when we can't manage a whole sentence. "You said his file's clean. You said Kayla could freeze it. Show me how." He swallowed. "I want to do it. Me. I want it to be me that does it. I want it to be me that does it." He'd heard the whole thing in the backyard. He'd heard what it meant that Kayla did the freeze with her own hands. He understood, the way only someone raised inside the machine could, that there is a difference between being saved and being the one who reaches. He wanted to reach for once, for his own kid, with his own hands. I could have said a lot of things to him about the bar, about the 84,000 that ran through his account, about 40 years of unopened beers and looking at labels while our mother did the cutting. Maybe those conversations are still coming. Maybe he'll face his own number in his own building. I didn't build the case to spare him, and I told him so. But that morning I just stepped back and let my brother into my apartment, and I sat him at my kitchen table, under the lamp, in the chair where I'd found out what they'd done to both of us at 9 and at 8, and I turned my laptop toward him, and I walked him through freezing his son's credit the way I'd walk a stranger through it. his hand on the mouse, his information verifying him as the father. And when the confirmation came up, Eli's file locked, permanent, his, Dale read it out loud in a voice that came apart worse than mine ever has. And he put his head down on my kitchen table, and he stayed like that for a while. And I put my hand on the back of my brother's neck, on the exact spot where a proud hand once rested to keep him still, and I let him break where somebody would see it. We are not fixed, Dale and I. I want to be honest about that because I've been honest about all of it. Some machines you can stop without being able to repair the people they ran on. But 2 of the 4 children in this story are locked now, safe, unspendable, and one of them got locked by his own father, and I have decided that has to be worth something, because if it isn't, then nothing a person does after they've been broken young can ever be worth anything, and I refuse to live in that math. The official part turned slowly, the way official parts do. The affidavit blocked the debt off my name inside 3 weeks. Furnishers are required to, once the report and the police file exist, and mine existed, cold and stamped and real. The rest of it, the part with my parents' names in it, went where such things go, into the patient machinery of people whose whole job is to care that a 3-year-old was made to co-sign an $18,000 line of credit. I gave my statement. I gave my file. I did not have to raise my voice for any of it, because I'd spent my whole career learning that the loudest thing in any room is a date that won't line up, and I had a column of them. But that's the part that ends. The reports close, the debts clear, the case numbers go to sleep in their buildings. There was one more thing I had to do that doesn't close, that I'm still doing, that I will be doing for the rest of my life, and it's the only part of this I'd stand up and tell you about at a party. I took Josie to the bank. Kayla came, and we made an afternoon of it, and I let Josie pick the pen. It was a real account, a small one, the kind a 6-year-old opens with birthday money, and it is frozen and protected and layered with every safeguard I know how to build, and I know how to build a great many. Nobody borrows against this one. Nobody spends it while she holds still. It exists only to do the thing she was told a bank does, which is keep what's hers until she's ready for it. The teller slid a little book across the counter. They still make them, it turns out. It was blue. I put Josie on my knee so she could reach, and I steadied the book, and I watched my niece write her own name inside it, one careful letter at a time, the way you write when writing is still work. And I understood, finally, and all the way through, what that handwriting had meant on 7 loan applications, and what it would mean here instead. The same small hand. A different destiny for it. That's yours, I told her, close to her ear, the way it was once said to me. Nobody else's. You know what you are? She looked up. You're the responsible one. And this time it was true, because I made it true, because I stood behind the words this time instead of using them. That's the whole difference. That's the only difference that has ever mattered in my family, and it took me 36 years and a felony against a 3-year-old to learn it. The words were never the crime. The words were beautiful. You're the responsible one. You're chosen. The babies are everything. They're the most beautiful things a family says. The crime was saying them with your other hand in the till. Here is the thing I know now that I didn't know at my mother's Sunday table, and it's the thing I'd want you to take home if you took nothing else. My whole life they told me what I was. Alone. Childless. The one with nothing to protect, and therefore nothing anyone needed to protect. My mother said it like a diagnosis, and I wore it like one, and on the worst nights I believed the quiet, ugly heart of it, that a woman with no husband and no children is a woman with an empty balance, a life that comes out even because there was never much in it to begin with. I pressed my thumb to a blue book and let them tell me I was the spare. And then it turned out that the childless one was the only adult in the whole family who could read the machine. That the woman with nothing to protect was the only one standing between 2 children and the people who were scheduling them. It turned out I had the most reason of anyone at that table, more than the mothers, more than the grandmother who kissed the paper crown, because I was the one who knew, in my own body, in my own credit file, exactly what was being taken, and exactly how young you have to be when they take it. They called me empty. I was the gatekeeper. I had just never been given a gate, So I built my own, and I put it in front of the children, and I am not moving. I don't see my parents. That's not a wound anymore. It's a door, and I'm the one holding it, and it stays shut. My mother still has the passbook, my old one, the blue book with my 9-year-old name in it. She can keep it. She grabbed the wrong one at that party, in front of everyone, and she'll spend the rest of her life having grabbed it, reaching for the proof of what she did instead of the granddaughter she did it to. That's her even. She can have it. Josie's book is in Josie's drawer, in Josie's house, in Josie's own careful hand. Sometimes she calls me to tell me the balance went up $1. I always sound amazed, and every single time before we hang up, I tell her the same thing, because some rituals are worth keeping and worth doing right. I tell her it's hers, nobody else's, and that she's the responsible one, and that her Aunt Ingy is standing at the gate, and nothing gets in. I'm 36. I'm alone, the way they always said. And I have never in my life had more to protect.